Historically, the hysterical character in a horror movie has been a woman, trading on not only their ability to conjure the most blood-curdling screams, but an archetype and stereotype popularized and perpetuated by Alfred Hitchcock. The advent of the Scream Queen in the 1970s brought a change in the perception of women in horror, edging out this worn gender trope and transposing them from the set-upon damsels to fully realized ass-kickers in their own right. But we're not here to talk about them. We're here to talk about the characters who are, more often than not, insensible in the face of looming evil, their brains going to mush, and their instincts telling them to go absolutely apeshit at the first sign of a long shadow. While this is seen by many as their greatest character failure, in truth this would be the vast majority of us in the same situation. Let's face it, we're not exactly purging on the weekends and summering at Camp Crystal Lake. Many of these characters are just ordinary folks, so let their emotions get the better of them. So sometimes the hysteria in these films arises as a symptom of an underlying mental illness, and contrary to Hitchcock's approach, many of the most hysterical horror characters in the years since his reign have been men. With that in mind, I'm Sean Ferrick for What Culture Horror, and here are the 10 most hysterical characters in horror movie history. Number 10. Jesse Walsh, A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. Elm Street victims aren't known for their stoicism, but some are less equal than others. A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, brings the Dream Demon back with a vengeance. 5 years after the events of the first film, Freddy returns to haunt Jesse Walsh, who has moved into the former home of the last attack's sole survivor, Nancy Thompson. Requiring a host to enact his vendetta on the town's teens, Freddy possesses Jesse and corrupts him from the inside out. Ostensibly set up as the film's straight man, Jesse is anything but. Beside the fact that many have interpreted Nightmare 2 as a metaphor for Jesse's repressed homosexuality, something supported in no small part by the BDSM killing of his gay coach in the showers, Jesse reacts indifferently to some of the horrifying things happening around him, but goes completely bananas at others, screaming and howling. That the sound production team didn't have Patton record his scream more than once or twice only makes things stranger, or at least more comical, as every one of Jesse's absurdly high-pitched OTT screams sounds almost identical. To be fair to him, Nightmare 2 has the scariest and least wacky Freddy in the entire series, and it can't exactly be easy growing claws and a jumper out of your skin. Number 9. Hysterical Mother in Diner, The Birds. Alongside Psycho, The Birds is one of the films that popularized horror cinema from the 1960s onwards and has earned its place as one of Alfred Hitchcock's best-known films. Focusing on a series of sudden, violent and often fatal bird attacks, the film generated in the public a newfound fear of our flying friends and turned model Tippi Hedren into a star. The easy choice here may seem to be Hedren's Melanie Daniels, as one of the hysterical damsels Hitchcock was known for bringing to the screen. However, much to her credit, the actress carries off fear and panic without raising the pitch a decibel, managing to seem flustered yet consistently rational and level-headed throughout the film. Instead, we turn to the creatively entitled Hysterical Mother in Diner. Played by Doreen Lang, a frequent character actor in Hitchcock flicks, the mother begins agitating at Melanie's reports of bird attacks, working herself into a flurry and telling her two children to abandon their food mid-meal so that they can get out of there. It's not long before she's back, however, dragging both children into the diner after the bird's antics have blown up the petrol station. In a perplexing direct-to-camera speech, she blames Melanie for the bird attacks, shrieking and screaming and proclaiming her to be evil, and in true 60s fashion, she is set right with a firm slap. Number 8. Danny Ardor, Midsummer. With a country fair colour palette and matching visual aesthetic, Ari Aster's Midsummer took us by surprise in the summer of 2019, offering up a harrowing ordeal of drugs, death and dangerous sweets. Florence Pugh stars as Danny, a college student grieving from the sudden death of her entire family at the hands of her suicidal sister. Accompanying her boyfriend Christian and a few of his closer classmates, she opts to get away from it all by going on an anthropologically informed trip to backwoods Sweden for a traditional summer festival. All is not as it seems, however, and the happy locals begin picking off the group one by one. Danny spends the trip in the throes of an emotional rollercoaster, dealing with her past and present in unison, and never quite knowing whether she's coming or going. Aster manages to spin the hysterical trope on its head, as her anguish and visible signs of distress are totally justified, and not the product of being a Hitchcockian emotional woman. At the height of her hysteria, after witnessing Christian cheating on her, Danny breaks down, sobbing and screaming, and is joined by the other women of the commune, who almost seem to be twistedly mocking her by reflecting her out-of-control emotions. Her knowing smile at the end, however, suggests something inside Danny may have shifted for good. Number 7. Stu Marer, Scream. Everyone's favourite Pomo-slasher series, Scream, is rife with characters who, despite their better interests, and frequently their insider knowledge of horror movie tropes, manage to run hysterically into the gaping maw of danger. And that danger comes in the form of a munch-faced reaper with a penchant for prank kills and a love for sharp knives. Surprisingly, the most hysterical character of the series is not a victim, but Ghostface himself, Stu Marer. Sharing the villain's mantle with Billy Loomis, Stu provides the wacky, out-of-control counterpoint to Billy's calculated, psychotic mastermind. mastermind. While Stu seems like just another OTT high schooler for the bulk of Scream, he really comes unstuck in its final act, going from 0 to 60 quicker than you can say boo. Seemingly completely incapable of controlling his emotions, Stu pinwheels from cold calculation to scenery-chewing laughter to wailing faux repentance in just a few short minutes. Even at death's door, he seems more concerned that Billy hit him with the phone and that his mum and dad are going to be mad at him than the fact he's bleeding out on the kitchen counter. Raised on TV and 80s and 90s pop culture, he's a reflection of the malleability of Gen X and millennial culture and how permeated it is, with advertising pinging jarringly from one influence to the next. Fittingly, then, Sydney ends him with a TV to the head. Number 6. Joan Lambert, Alien. The occupants of the Alien universe are not known for their level-headed approach to extraterrestrial life, honestly. But one of the very first fools in outer space ever to tangle with a terror and totally lose their head was Alien's Lambert, the series' first and perhaps only transgender character. Played by Veronica Cartwright, Lambert is the Nostromo's navigator and acts as a foil to Ripley, the latter of whom becomes the archetype for the strong, stoic action heroine by the film's conclusion, and even more so with each subsequent entry in the series. By far the most shaken member of the group, Lambert loses her composure early on, crying and seeking to abandon ship before freezing up in the face of the xenomorph, which is the last time she'll ever do that. One has to assume the crew for such a long, deep space mission would have been vetted to ensure mental and emotional rigor, yet somehow Lambert slipped through the cracks. Originally auditioning for Ripley, Cartwright was not a fan of the character's fragility, but accepted the role anyway. The crew convinced her that her emotional state was designed to reflect the audience's fears and provide an entry point for the average viewer. Number 5. Annie Wilkes, Misery. Few people write hysterical characters as well as Stephen King, and the characters of his Misery, adapted by Rob Reiner in 1990, is no exception. Misery is the story of how former nurse Annie Wilkes saves novelist Paul Sheldon from a car accident only to take him hostage and force him to rewrite his latest novel for her. Masterfully played by Kathy Bates, Annie is a melting pot of high-strung emotions and sinister designs. Though at the beginning of the film she seems little more than a kindly, homely woman intent on nursing her favourite author back to health, the mask begins to slip as Paul rebels and the real Annie comes out to play. Apart from the horrors she visits on Paul, including a harrowing hobbling scene few of us will ever forget, Annie is generally unstable and clearly not used to keeping a social face on for more than a few hours. The hobbling scene itself is a symptom of Annie's inability to control her emotions. Discovering the already frail Paul's attempts to escape, she breaks his ankles as punishment to prevent him from trying again. She claims to be Paul's #1 fan, but abuses him to near death, and for every modest trait, her disapproval of swearing for example, she is so easily gripped by its opposite. Number 4. Lorraine X. 1970s set X proved a surprise hit in cinemas, steeped as it is in slasher nostalgia and gruesome tongue-in-cheek kills. A troupe of porn actors shooting a film in rural Texas rent a barnyard cabin from a weird old couple who give everyone a definite case of the EBGBs. One thing leads to another and soon the young cast are caught in a desperate fight for their lives. Unfortunately for ex-stripper and final girl Maxine, her counterpoint towards the conclusion of the film is the panic-prone Lorraine, played by Jenna Ortega, who has never starred in a porno before, never mind fought off a pair of psychopathic OAPs. Lorraine discovers the corpse of the man in the couple's basement in the dark of night and lets out one of the most blood-curdling, house-awakening screams this side of Psycho. Her complete lack of self-control leads to her capture, mutilation, and death, not to mention almost causing the death of Maxine by shrieking and howling and running outside straight into the shotgun barrel of her killers. She blamed Maxine for her misfortune, but really she just needed to take a chill pill and assess the situation. Number 3. Wendy Torrance, The Shining. It would be nigh impossible to talk about hysterical characters without mentioning Wendy Torrance, played by the late great Shelley Duvall. So infamously off the reservation is her turn in Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. From the start, Wendy is vulnerable, weak and submissive, more likely to break down than stand up to her husband Jack, and once the otherworldly madness at the Overlook Hotel kicks in, she is all this and more, or perhaps less. Tormented by Jack, Wendy is brought beyond the point of reason when things start to go topsy-turvy, and she becomes a blubbering, bumbling mess, barely able to pull herself together enough to try and save their son from his father's wrath. It's a testament not only to Duvall's acting abilities, but to the sheer scope of the psychological torment that Kubrick put her through on set, that the performance came out the way that it did, but the character is undeniably hysterical for the majority of her screen time. Author of the original novel, Stephen King, yes, him again, has even said that he feels Kubrick turned Wendy into one of the most misogynistic characters ever put to film, who is basically just there to scream and be stupid. Alas, where's the lie? Number 2. Norman Bates, Psycho. It should come as little surprise to see Hitchcock rear his baldy head twice in this video, given the infamy attached to his depictions of intemperate women. But perhaps all is not as straightforward as it seems. The film's partial protagonist, Marion Crane, might be the obvious pick for this slot, given her susceptibility to flights of fancy and, of course, her performance in The Shower. But Come on, she was being murdered. No, in terms of actually certifiably hysterical behaviour, motel owner Norman Bates is far more out of control, over the top, and downright emotional than Marion, who, let's face it, only caused a scene in her purest moment of horror could ever be. Norman has some serious mummy issues, and these have translated into an emotionally unstable adult who, rather than control his emotions, has allowed them to take him as they please. This includes his forays into the persona of his mother, in which he flies off the handle at a moment's notice, and sometimes does much, much worse. Granted, having a dissociative identity disorder doesn't help matters, but even when Norman is out of his mother guise, he is prone to agitation, paranoia, and possessiveness. Number 1. Pennywise, It, Chapters 1 and 2. Yet another villain clawed straight from the mind of Stephen King, Pennywise is single-handedly responsible for renewing the world's fear of clowns in the modern age. Whether it's the giant forehead, the bright red slashes down his face, or the fact that he can literally transform into your worst fear at any given moment, sorry, we have good reason to steer clear. Brought to life in 2017's It and 2019's It Chapter 2 by a magnificently well-cast Bill Skarsgård, the dancing clown of death and doom emerges every 27 years in the fictional town of Derry. Not to be confused, of course, with Derry from Northern Ireland, intent on satiating his appetite and relieving the town of as many children as he can consume, but he's not without his flaws. Pennywise is prone to strops of hellish magnitude, turning on a smile for playtime and throwing all his toys out of the proverbial pram when he doesn't get his own way. Hysterical to a fault, his emotions often have a physical manifestation, not just in his shouting and wailing or his mood, but in the way he looks and speaks as well. In fact, he is so incapable of reining himself in that he quite literally shrinks into a moaning, squealing character of himself who screams his last when the Derry natives control their own emotions to kill him.